How's it going, friends? Welcome to episode 1 of the Cynical Den Podcast, a show for jaded nihilists with rapidly declining mental health. I'm your host Fringy, and I hope this show provides you with a temporary escape from the dumpster fire that is planet Earth. I'm really thrilled to have you guys with me for the first episode, an episode for a podcast that I've been debating about doing for at least a few months, if not over a year. I feel like there's something that I can hopefully offer to the format and give people who have a similar sense of humor to me, which is probably the reason why you like Crude Penguin on my channel, a show that's kind of for people like us, to try and make light of the shit things going on in the world with a little bit of snarky comedy. Now, for those of you who are with us for the first time who aren't familiar with my work or the stuff that I do on Crude Penguin, this is going to be a weekly podcast every Saturday morning in Australian time, or Friday evening or night if you're in the US or Europe. And we're going to be doing one of these once a week about whatever topics I feel like, which means that it'll not only include just general ramblings about the things that are going on in the world, but also topics that I'm interested in, like video games, TV, film, you name it. Basically, nothing's off limits, but I'm going to try my best not to be too much of a dick. I'm here to have a good time. I'm not trying to be really aggressive. I'm just trying to sort of let out my frustrations in a little bit more of a positive, but albeit like in a tone of cynicism kind of manner. So, without further ado, let me tell you a little story to start off the show. So, I recently had to go to a shopping center despite my best judgment because I hate going to shopping centers. We'll be talking about this when we talk about fucking Christmas shopping. But for this, I had to go to the shopping center to get something done, and it was a Saturday, so lots of cars. But I was hoping that I wouldn't have to walk a marathon to get to the front entrance. I was hoping that I could find a spot. So I was going through the parking lot, and then I found a spot, and I'm like, oh, sweet, okay, I find a spot not too far away. I drive in, and to my shock, the dickhead has parked diagonally to where it's virtually impossible for me to get into the park. It's certainly not happening in one try, and there's a very high risk of trading paint. All because this guy decided to park diagonally and then decide to himself, well, it doesn't matter if someone else is going to have inconvenience getting in here. I've got a spot, so it's all good. There are so many bad parkers, which baffles me because, at least in Australia, you have to know how to park to get your driver's license. I mean, it's pretty important that you know how to put your car in a stationary position in locations other than your home. It's kind of a necessity. So, the way I see it, it's not that these people don't know how to park their cars, they just don't care. As long as they've got their spot, it's a-okay. As long as I'm doing fine, it doesn't matter if everybody else is gonna have a bad fucking day because of me. It really is pure selfishness that these people don't seem to understand that a parking lot with thousands of spots is, interestingly enough, it's not just for you. There's other people who need to park there. There's other people who need things to do. It's not that hard to park straight in the spot. They leave you plenty of room unless you're driving an M1 Abrams. You should have no issue getting into the park. And it's funny, like, what is the thought process when they park? When they're trying to park the car? Because when you park, you can tell immediately if you're in the spot. And if not, open the door and you can see the line. All good to be able to find out whether or not you're in the park. So there's no excuse for not getting it right, because you can easily pull out and straighten up and go back in. It's not like you get 3 attempts and then it's like, oh, no, predator missile gets launched at your car. Too tough shit, you tried too many times. Some of these drivers, they got no clue what they're doing. It's funny because we've got all this rigorous testing to get your license. You've got to drive for a certain amount of time. You've got to know the rules. You can't get anything wrong in the give way test. And yet so many drivers are purely incapable of understanding how to navigate the road. It's not that hard. Turn on the car and steer it in the direction that you want to go. But people have got to make it a big issue, as though it's really that difficult to start the car, stop the car, especially when we've got people driving automatic cars, where you don't need to worry about the clutch, you don't need to worry about the gears. It is the easiest thing ever, and people still don't know how to do it right. God damn. So jettisoning on from that story, let's discuss an actual topic that's worth addressing. So, over the course of the last year, there's been something of a rise in alternative media sites. I'm not going to specifically name the sites, But the criterion for which we can talk about these websites and YouTube channels is basically people who aren't mainstream. So people who aren't televised or the major players' websites that you know of. These are alternative and with a few exceptions, they generally have some sort of bias. I mean, they are forthcoming about their bias, but the bias still exists, which is something that people need to remember. Now, the mainstream media has lost all credibility in the eyes of most people for the fact that they just simply refuse to report honestly. And I can actually fully understand why they do this, because you get taught that you have to persuade people as opposed to doing your job, which is just to tell people the information as it is. But no, I can't be a journalist and just tell people the facts. I've got to throw in my irrelevant opinion that nobody cares about. And when you do that, when you come into an article, instead of just reporting how it is, you're coming in with a certain desired outcome. At that stage, the journalistic credibility is gone. It's just gone. You're not going to get the facts, and you're going to really have to find the facts yourself to get the full story. Now, with the alternative media coming out and debunking some of the claims of these websites, you've now got people going, oh, the mainstream media is awful. Go alternative media. And while I can understand that for certain hosts and certain websites that are basically just trying to be as fair as possible and just report the facts as they are, with so many of these websites, I can't get the thought out of the back of my mind that, I'm a little bit concerned that you're not actually telling me the full story, or, well, the fact that you're forthcoming about your bias leads me to believe that you're not going to report things honestly. See, people seem to think, well, the mainstream media sucks, so therefore alternative media is good. But that's not how it works. It's not like there's just a good-bad paradigm where you've got, okay, one thing's bad, so the other thing's good. AIDS is an alternative to brain cancer, but that doesn't mean that it's super duper fantastic. Being an alternative to dog shit doesn't mean you're automatically great. When you actually look into a lot of these sites, you start to see the facade fall down. The claim of open honesty and truth in many of these cases ends up being a complete lie, and these people turn out to be just as partisan, just as full of bollocks as the people that they tend to criticize. It's almost as if there's an ulterior motive at play. Now, I've explained in many instances that when it comes to politics, I'm starting to get to the point where I'm just like, I don't care. I'm finding it too difficult. It's hurting my head. I'd rather play video games. And this is very much the case when the vast majority of the information that's being sent your way is filled with some sort of bias. It's just riddled with bias. And everybody's biased. Everybody is biased. I'm definitely biased. That's why I'm not a journalist. That's why I sit here and do a podcast for you now. But if I were to be a journalist, I feel like it would be quite important for me to remove that bias out of the equation and focus on just giving you the information as it is, as opposed to trying to spin something. But the issue is that spin is very effective. Many people just are looking for that spin. They're looking for that confirmation bias. See, when you look at a lot of these people who are now flooding to alternative sites, it feels like in many instances they're just looking for that confirmation bias, to the point that when that person that they think is always going to think this way ends up having a different opinion to what they initially conceived of them having, they actually get mad at the person. What, you have an opinion that is not the same as my preconceived notions of how you think? Wow, fuck you. Yeah, your total rationality. You were just brilliant. You were doing a great job. You were a credit to humanity. It certainly wouldn't be advantageous for you to stop breathing. And I think a lot of these websites have sort of capitalized on the failings of the mainstream media as a way to bolster their platforms. I mean, we've seen plenty of examples of this where certain channels, certain organizations, zoom up in the ratings, up with the retention. It's all good for them, but you always have to be concerned about the ulterior motives behind it, because frankly, I don't trust everybody. I think it's worth actually being a bit skeptical of all media sites, no matter, especially the ones that purport to tell you the truth, because when someone purports to tell you the truth, at that stage, it's generally a situation of, yeah, I'm a little bit concerned now. See, when it comes to me, I look at myself as, I'm not a journalist, I'm not anything like that, I'm just a guy called Fringy, who is cynical about everything, who just has these opinions on certain topics. I'm not purporting to give you, just the raw truth. I want to give you the truth and then just tell you my opinion about it, as opposed to presenting my opinion as the truth. Because it's not. I'm just some loser on the internet. I mean, I don't know the answers to everything. It's just me trying to make sense of this, what's going on in the world, which is very difficult to do because of how much misinformation is out there. And it would really help if people stopped looking at organizations so dogmatically. Like, this organization is the best. I love them. Is it because they tell you the truth? Well, there's that, but they also agree with my political opinions. Oh, okay, so it's not really the truth then. It's more that they agree with your opinions. Blocked. Particularly blocked when it comes to certain websites writing specific articles that are about how terrible you are because you started listening to other people's opinions. So let's jettison out of the topic of alternative media to an article that I found shared on my Facebook feed from a person who I am genuinely considering unfriending if they didn't post this ironically, from a website called Everyday Feminism. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this website. They write very terrible articles, and it's generally because they try to infer things that they can't possibly know. It's a lot of this internet mind reading that's going on, where it's like, well, I read a book that told me that this is how you think and this is the way that you were raised, so I'm just gonna assume that. As though it makes any sense to tell people that you don't know how they think. Or as though everybody has lived the same life. It's ridiculous. But remember, it's a-okay to mischaracterize your opposition as long as they're a certain race and sex, because that's not racist or sexist. The article we're reading today is entitled, From Manspreading to Mansplaining, 6 Ways Men Dominate the Space Around Them. Oh boy, I'm looking forward to this one. Now, I don't want to read you the whole thing because it's awful and it's really long and really boring and poorly written. But we're just gonna go through the good bits. Now, the author starts off by talking about how he was manspreading, which is basically the act of sitting with your legs partially open, because, you may not know this, what with the lack of the organs down there, but most men tend to have these things between their legs that are fairly uncomfortable to squeeze together. Now, like I said, it's clear that you're not familiar with this feeling or this sensation, but I'm done insulting you for the time being. We'll just get into your article. It's not about men actively choosing to be jerks or trying to be sexist and ableist, since the outcome of our manspreading not only takes up space under the guise of our needing more room, but also often makes space less accessible for people with disabilities. It's entirely about our socialization, about how we've been taught in subtle and overt ways. Ooh, I know words. Never considered how entitled to public space we may act or feel. Now, this is interesting how this guy just purports to assume that all men feel entitled to take up space. I mean, I'm sorry that I can't bend the cosmos to generate more space for me to occupy, but there's a certain amount of space that men need to take up, just like there's a certain amount of space that women need to take up, and a certain amount of space that Bengal tigers need to make up. We exist. There's space that we occupy. It's not like we're being dicks for the sake of, just because we're occupying space. He then proceeds to talk about how men are basically taught to be assholes and take up space because we feel entitled to it, and then we proceed into the reasons that this person presents for how we're dominating space, us men. We need to be put in our place. We're taking up all this space, and we're not thinking about the poor women's. As though women need men to basically defend them about occupying space. I'm not a sexist, I just think I need to defend women about how much space men take up in public transport. Number 1, men dominate physical space. Though I'm not into the whole CrossFit thing, one of the things I've heard many women say is that CrossFit is pretty inclusive, and that they're much less likely to experience dude bro entitlement at the CrossFit gym. I can't tell you how many committed female and gender non-conforming gym goers I've talked to about how hard it is to be in the gyms with men who either constantly hit on them and harass them, or leave little room for them with their grunting, screaming, and throwing weights. And like manspreading, this might just be a case of individuals being rude if it weren't for all the ways that we as men show entitlement to physical space. Okay, so stop. You start off by saying something logical like, oh, it just might be that certain people are annoying. No, it's all of us. All of us. All men grunt, all men scream, all men throw weights, and all men hit on women at the gym. How can you say that as though you know that? In my own case, it's shown up with my friends on the dance floor. We love to dance and we love to really get into it. Really? You like to dance at the club? Really? When there's a crowded dance floor, that's not my scene. So when the club is occupied as normal, it's not your scene. Why would you go? I want one where we can really move, but when that makes it hard for others to enjoy their time on the dance floor, our reaction needs to be less, they're just fun killers, and more, how can we have this awesome time while respecting other people's space? If you cared about your space being respected, you wouldn't go to the club. When you go to the club, you're basically saying, I give consent for people to be really close to me. Could you imagine? It's like you go into space, and you're like, man, there's not a lot of air out here. From hyper-competitively running over women in mixed gender sports to dudes taking up entire tables in crowded libraries or coffee shops, we could do better to thinking critically about the physical space we occupy and call on other men to do the same. Yeah, you guys sitting at the coffee shop, you're taking up too much space. Just get the fuck out. What am I reading? This is a good one. Men act entitled to intellectual space. Whether we're mansplaining, you know that thing where you tell people that they're biologically incapable of explaining something to you because you're totally not sexist. Something that people who don't share our gender clearly can understand for themselves, or actively contributing to intersectional gender oppression in the academy. Men are really good at dominating intellectual space. This is something I know I'm really good at, and it's something I need to work on. I show entitlement to intellectual space by talking down to others in online debates or in coffee shop discussions, but it's uniquely problematic when I'm doing this, as I've been known to do to women about women's issues. So it's interesting that you talk about how you talk down to people in an article where you talk down to me. That's just called condescension. We don't need a gender-specific word to explain acting like a twat. It's funny because a lot of these people don't seem to understand that it genuinely is difficult for us to understand what you're saying, because we just do not have a clue what you're saying. You're throwing in a whole bunch of words that don't mean anything, and so they start blurring together. It just turns into white noise. Now, of course, we get to the good one. Men dominate and control professional spaces. We don't need a Harvard study to tell us that the business world is filled with male dominance and entitlement. All we have to do is listen to any woman works in these environments. Wow, that is some brilliant grammar. All we have to do is listen to any woman works in these environments. That is fantastic. Good job, buddy. Yet much like manspreading, we have dudes constantly denying even the possibility that it might be sexism and masculinity that's the problem. Simply telling women to lean in demands nothing of us as men. It frees us from listening and reflecting, rather than dominating and acting entitled in professional environments. So basically, instead of just saying, hey, you want to get involved in the conversation? Yeah, just jump in and let us know what you think. You know, a thing where it encourages confidence in your co-workers, whether it be a man or a woman, just telling them, hey, get involved, let's talk about this. Surely it's better advice to encourage everybody to share their opinions rather than demand that some people hold back their opinions purely because someone might feel like they're being condescending. That sounds quite counterproductive. I mean, I'm glad you're not a CEO. We'll get lots of things done. You're in a board meeting? Okay, so I'm thinking about the fight. Shut the fuck up, Bruce! Let Jenna talk. Go on, Jenna. I was gonna talk about it later, just after you let him talk. You don't need to defend me. No, go ahead. We need to help you. We need to help you, Jenna, who was in our board meeting because you were qualified for the job. I understand that you're qualified for the job, but I need to coddle you into making you feel comfortable. I'm not the sexist, guys. It's funny how it all becomes so ironic that you got the people who claim to not be racist and sexist who think so little of the people that they're defending, as though they need defending in the first place, as though women are incapable of working in high stress, high productivity workplaces. Plenty of women work in boards. Plenty of women are CEOs. I think they're doing it all right, mate. We got 3 more, so buckle in. We're only halfway through. We got halfway to go. Woo, yeah. God damn it. Men regularly show entitlement to social spaces. I'll be the first to admit it. I've been that guy on countless occasions. The one making a scene and shouting over other people to be hilarious, center of attention of a party. And I've been the one who takes off his pants or otherwise acts like a fool. But our entitlement to social space, an entitlement that often gets rewarded by people of all genders, doesn't have to be as obvious as the center of attention at a party. Many men's voices tend to be on the louder side, but that doesn't mean that we're incapable of regulating our tone of voice so we aren't dominating our room with our booming baritone, nor do we have to interrupt others to get in that priceless joke or have our point heard. Well, I mean, you're talking about a party, you know, where they play loud music. To be loud is kind of necessary. And coming from someone who tends to have difficulty regulating the volume of their voice, I can tell you, it ain't that easy to do it, because you gotta think about it while you're doing it, which is a challenge. It's just something that a lot of people aren't able to do. Yet this guy thinks it's like the easiest thing ever. Hey, just stop being so loud. Oh, okay, thanks, buddy. I was just having a good time with my friends until you showed up. Men control political spaces. Even among the most progressive of men, what are we using our political power and energy for? Are we focusing on electing ourselves or other men? Are we allowing traditional male dominance to shut out women of various formal and informal political processes? Well, I don't know why you're saying we. I'm not a politician. And my vote counts for the same as a woman. So I don't understand what else I could do. I'm not a politician. I vote just like a woman would. So what do I do? What do I do? I'm finding it very difficult to actually get through this article because it's so bad. It's so laughably bad. It's really difficult to even articulate into words how wrong this article is. It's like, oh man, we just gotta stop being obnoxious twats. Well, I don't think I'm an obnoxious twat. No, but you are because you've been raised in this society. Oh, okay, so you know me then. You could tell me what my name is even? Well, I mean, no, I can't do that, but I know how you think. Why? Because a book told me. Great, bravo. You're really making use out of that college degree, aren't you, mate? Let's move on to something a little bit more entertaining. Video games. So, it is now approaching the end of the year, which means that every company has to release their game within the span of 2 months, because it's a good idea to launch in time for Christmas, even if it means that you're cutting down your sales by competing against like 10 other titles. It's brilliant business move. It certainly hasn't negatively affected any games. And I think we can all give a round of applause to these CEOs for being so smart to figure out that it's actually a good idea to release when there's many other games for people to choose from. Brilliant! Ubisoft have been doing a good job lately, I must admit, because I recently picked up Watch Dogs 2 on PC, which actually works, thank the Lord, and I've been having a blast playing it. It's a good game. Now, I might be a bit biased because I actually did enjoy the first Watch Dogs, but I feel like Watch Dogs 2 is pretty much the sequel that it needed to be, and that it improves on the first game in many ways. It adds more hacking tools, it's got a bigger open world that's a little bit more varied, even though I really did like the Chicago setting. And it's just got a little bit more levity to it. I mean, it's not really like ha 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 funny, but it's kind of got a bit of charm, even though you think that I wouldn't like it because it's basically starring hipsters. But there's a certain amount of levity to it that I'm finding really enjoyable, and it's just been a fun game that's included a lot of stealth elements. There's something you don't really expect in your traditional GTA-like open world game, like really fleshed out stealth elements. Though admittedly, they don't seem to work very well in the sense that as soon as a guard spots you, everybody knows that you're there. I didn't realize that they were telepathically communicating with each other, given that that's the only way that a dude 50 to 70 meters away from all of his buddies could potentially alert the other guards, hey, this guy's here, let's use lethal rounds to kill him very quickly. But then again, I probably shouldn't be talking about realism in a game in which you basically press one button to destroy, like, traffic lights and burst water mains. It's funny, realism in Ubisoft games seems to be a thing that they just don't like, because I've been playing The Division, one of the least realistic games I've ever played, and it's not because of the aesthetic. I mean, it looks beautiful. And the new survival mode is a little bit more realistic in the sense, and that mode is great, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But the fact that when you just walk around the open world, it's like, oh yeah, I got this light machine gun, 100 rounds, and it takes 50 clips to put a dude down. I didn't realize that all it took to withstand a hailstorm of bullets was to put on a scarf, a beanie, and like a small like cardboard chest plate. I should just enlist in the military. I'll be like Master Chief. The survival mode that they recently added is actually fantastic. As someone who had some difficulty playing the base game, just because there were just these things that I didn't like about it, to come into this game and be able to focus purely on survival, it's been great. Until I got killed when there were only 4 agents left, or when I got to the dark zone before everybody else and got killed. I can see that it's going to take a lot of trial and error to really get to the end of that. But I've been having a blast with it. It's really intense. It actually gets you on edge because it's a permadeath game mode. So you can spend 45 minutes to an hour and come out with basically nothing. And some people will say, well, that doesn't sound fun. But I think the fact that there's those stakes means that you feel the pressure. It gets more intense the longer it goes on. The less people there are to compete, the more time you've invested, the closer you are to victory, and the more painful it is when they snatch it away. It's a great game mode. I don't know if it was worth $15 to play it, but I've been having a blast with that, and I'll probably be playing a lot more of it. Speaking of games, Last Guardian comes out, finally. It only took him 9 years to get it done. That game does look awesome, and I'm really keen on checking it out. I haven't played the other Team Ico games, like Ico and Shadow of the Colossus, as much as I would like to, but I'll probably go back to them after I play The Last Guardian. I'm just looking forward to playing a game that isn't about killing dudes this particular holiday season. Because all of the other games, while I've enjoyed them, and there have been a lot of great games this year, I'm looking forward to playing one of those artsy games where there's no combat and it's just got a really good story between 2 characters. And that Trico guy, like the Trico monster, he looks awesome. I'm looking forward to when he dies at the end of the game, which is probably what's going to happen. Now we move on to the final segment of the show, Q&A. Now, in future episodes, you can leave your comments you can leave your questions rather in the comment section of this video, and then they might be featured in the next video. It's topic related, so any topic that you feel like there's something to talk about, I'll be glad to talk about it. Today's question is from Major, which is, what are your thoughts on the PS4 Pro? I haven't really talked about the PS4 Pro mainly because I'm not super familiar with it, other than the fact that it's a slightly more powerful PS4. I mean, I'm not particularly interested in buying another console for a console I already own. I mean, for years, console guys have been trying to tell me, you buy a console, you're good for like the next 6 years. And now we've got a new version of the console that is definitively better only 3 years in. After buying a PS4, and especially after getting the Xbox One that I never use, I just don't see myself buying any of these things like the PS4 Pro or the Scorpio. At least with the Nintendo Switch, it's a brand new console. So there's going to be advantages to that. But when it's basically the same thing for a specific number of games, and I don't really care about resolutions anyway, since frame rate evidently doesn't matter to a lot of these guys, I don't really see the purpose. I might as well just stick with playing at 1080p or 1440p at a high frame rate on my PC, rather than unloading $400 or $500, depending on where you live, to get a console to play games at a bad frame rate. But at least it looks pretty. That's great. At least it looks nice. That should be the slogan for this generation in general. I mean, it runs awful, it doesn't play well, but at least it looks nice. That wraps it up for the very first episode of the Cynical Den Podcast. I thank you very much for joining me. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Remember, if you enjoyed the podcast, make sure to subscribe to this channel because all the podcasts will be uploaded here. If you're interested in seeing more of the stuff that Crude Penguin does, feel free to go to crudepenguin.com, check out the comics. I appreciate all of it. Remember to submit your questions for the next episode, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Cynical Den Podcast.